Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming in on time. We'll just give it a couple of more minutes before everybody comes in. We're expecting several more people. Thank you.
Don't forget to leave the presentation mode when Roger will speak. So we put her on the screen. Then you can reshare it again. Because now you're sharing. Just quickly stop sharing and then come back to sharing. But you will now first speak. You will start, right? First. You will first start saying. No, Roger will start. No.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming to the Nairobi Work Program event on Knowledge and Foresight on Adaptation Finance. To get us started, I'll invite the program lead for NWP, Rojina Manandar, who's joining us from Bonn. And you should be able to see her very soon to give us the framing context and set the objectives for this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arushi. And I'm just confirming if you can see me on screen and hear me well.
You're very tiny in one corner because we have the presentation up. So if that's okay, we can just get started.
I think so. It's okay. And welcome, everyone. I don't think I can see the room yet, but lovely to see everyone in the room. And as from the Nairobi Work Program team on site and from Bonn, we would like to welcome you all in our event on Knowledge and Foresight and Adaptation Finance. And it's our pleasure having you all in the room, and also for the participants who have joined us virtually. What I will do in my framing presentation or intervention, I will cover the operating context for adaptation landscape. I will then move on to the mandates for the Nairobi Work Program and where we are with our work on adaptation, foresight and adaptation finance. That we have been advancing under the Nairobi Work Program with our group of expert and knowledge holders. And I will conclude my intervention with what are the objectives and outcomes we would like to achieve at this event. If that's okay, maybe we can, I will just start with the operating context. As we know, the global climate agenda has shifted from commitments to implementation. The need for timely, understandable, and actionable knowledge has never been greater. And adaptation needs are evolving rapidly with evolving climate risk. In this context, adaptation is not just constrained by finance or technology. It's very important to acknowledge the importance of whether and if countries and communities have access to right knowledge in a right time and in the form they can utilize or access and deploy. Delivering context-specific, scalable adaptation knowledge, hence, is no longer optional. As I mentioned, is as critical as technology and finance and capacity building. And this is precisely where our work under the UNFCCC's Nairobi Work Program adds value by bridging knowledge into action. Just it becomes also clearer with how the adaptation finance landscape has been evolving. Just to give you a quick overview, or in terms of providing an evidence, UNEP report estimates that developing countries need 310 to 365 billion US dollar per year by 2035. Yet, international public adaptation finance has only reached $26 billion in 2023. This is closing this gap is not only about mobilizing resources, but is also about making sure that countries and communities on the ground have access to knowledge and know-how so they can access, deploy, and scale adaptation finance in an effective manner, and also to link global flows with local realities, options, and approaches through strategic partnerships and collaboration, which is what we are going to do in our event today. So where does Nairobi work program comes in this operating context and our mandates? Nairobi Work Program, as many of you in the room are hopefully aware, it's mandated to advance knowledge-based, inclusive, action-oriented work on adaptation. And what does this mean? So we engage diverse knowledge holders, and we are also identifying practical insights to support implementation and to scale up adaptation in countries and regions. This event that we are organizing with all of our stakeholders and partners in the room, and also governments, builds directly on this mandate, and in strengthening our role as a UNFCCC knowledge to action hub for adaptation and resilience. Through our network, which is now nearly 500 partner organizations, we have been convening experts and knowledge holders to co-create practical responses to respond to current and evolving climate risk. With this, I would like to provide a very quick overview of where we are, maybe with the next slide. Thank you so much. With where we are with our knowledge and foresight work on adaptation finance. As you can see on the slide, or on the screen, we convened 23 knowledge holders. That was beginning of our co-creative process in 2025, representing institutions which are academia, scientific institutions, private sector, financial institutions, community organizations, non-profit organization, and I think some of you are also present in this event today in person and also joining us virtually. And this co-creation process, which also we also use a forward-looking approach, unfolded through a series of 3 virtual meetings, which happened as a part of the step 1, as you see on the slide, culminating in an on-site event in Climate Week in Addis Ababa last year, 2025. This co-creative process had generated practical options to unlock adaptation finance. This includes, for example, community-led adaptation models, collaborative pipeline development, transparency work, and you will be hearing from my colleague Arushi shortly after this framing presentation. So I will not go into detail on what these options are. Importantly, this work has evolved with inputs from parties, stakeholders, our expert group in an iterative manner. And as you can see on this infographic stepwise slide, the work has advanced from dialogue to refinement of practical options, to exploring pathways and how this can be implemented, which is led by countries in a more flexible and customized ways. The 4th virtual meeting, beginning of this year, helped advance the pathways as a step 3, and now we are at step 5, which is taking the next step in our co-creative process. And then I'll take you to why we are here, which is my next slide. So why we are here in the event today, as I mentioned, this is part of the co-creative process, and we are convening everyone in the room, and you represent adaptation finance actors, knowledge holder, governments, local communities, indigenous peoples in the room and in joining us virtually. And our objective from this exercise that we are going to co-create together with you is to refine practical options and explore pathways for countries to apply them in a context-specific and flexible ways. And what we're aiming to get out of the outcomes, first, we are aiming that the options that we would be discussing together with you are refined, contextualized, and made accessible for parties and relevant actors. Second, of the partnerships are finalized or identified, at least, to support their uptake at both country and regional levels. Ultimately, in my closing, it is just about ensuring that this co-creative exercise is ensuring that knowledge is translated into action, which unlocks and scale adaptation finance to where it's needed the most. With that, I'd like to thank you, and I will pass the floor back to Arushi. Over to you, Arushi. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Regina, for framing the context and for shepherding the NWP process through the last 8 months of this co-creative process. Before we get into anything, and I walk you through the agenda, quick introduction. My name is Arushi Agarwal. I work with the UNFCCC Secretariat and the Nairobi Work Program, specifically on adaptation finance and building knowledge and know-how. I'm very grateful for your presence here today. And very quickly, I'd like to ask Thinley Namgyal to introduce himself, who I'm sure many of you know already. But Thinley.
Thank you, Arushi. Good afternoon. I'm Thinley from Bhutan. I used to be an adaptation negotiator for a long time with the LDC group, served on the LDC expert group as well, and most recently I was advisor on adaptation with the COP28 presidency in 2023-2024. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Thinley, and thank you for giving us your valuable time to be a part of this process. As you would have heard from Regina already, we know what we're here to do, the objectives and the expected outcomes from this event. We'll move into the first plenary where I will present, along with Thinley, the 6 practical options that we're going to be reviewing today with your help in the breakout session. So after the plenary, we'll move to the first breakout session. There will be a tea break where you will be allowed to rest your brains a little bit before we go into the next breakout session where we'll continue building on these practical options. And this will be followed by a second plenary where we will synthesize some of the key points from the breakout discussions. And then we will hear again from the Secretariat on the closing and way forward. With that, we move into the first plenary. And because this has been a long week for a lot of you, and it is Friday after lunch, I want to get everybody's participation. So here's a Menti, as you would have done several times before, but I would really appreciate if you can join again with several questions for you to answer. There it is. Okay, so we've quite some people from Bhutan and Germany. Thank you to the virtual participants. Great. This looks like a extensive representation. Yeah. Okay. Quick question on what kind of organization you are representing today. Just give it another couple of seconds. Again, here, the first two questions are essentially meant to indicate how diverse this group is. And in our opinion, that's very constructive to the co-creative process. So again, thank you very much for being a part of this process and its next steps. This question is to allow us to orient ourselves to the Foresight process in which this exercise is based. As you heard from Regina, this started as a what does the adaptation finance landscape look like in 2040? That was the guiding question for starting this process. And we'd love to orient you to what you anticipate the landscape to look like by 2040. All answers are correct, by the way, so please feel free to respond however you see fit. Indeed, it would be great if there was no need to worry about the availability of appropriate amounts of finance. We see triple adaptation finance for developing countries come up a couple of times. Very happy that someone's mentioned project pipelines because that is one of the practical options we'll be working through today. So to whoever who input that as an answer, you know which group to find. Fair bit of pessimism, but that's okay. Realistic, maybe someone will say. We do have a practical option on locally led adaptations. So again, this is great to hear these answers come in because they align very much with what we're thinking as well. I'll move to the next question, which is on the challenges to enhancing access to and mobilizing adaptation finance. This, again, is a part of the Foresight exercise and will be important in your breakout groups as you work through some of the pathways to implement the practical options. these are great responses again, and it would be good to have them reflected in the pathways that you will be working through in the breakout groups. Some of them are already part of the draft pathways, and it would be great to build on them further with your expertise and experiences. And with this, I'll move to the last question, which is a quick gauge on how well you understand the mandate and the vision for this session. And hopefully I'm able to sort out the not wells or not at alls in the next few minutes. Okay, so looks like Tinley and I have some work to do with the amount of not well, but hopefully the next several minutes will sort that out. Thank you for participating, and with that, we'll go back to the slides. Very quickly, the Nairobi Work Program, the mandate is to build knowledge and know-how on adaptation. This particular exercise is focused on adaptation finance, and we're working through, as Regina mentioned, several practical options that would help scale the amount of adaptation finance available by 2040. This is the list of our 6 practical options, and there are draft pathways to implement them in select geographies where we can pilot them, test their feasibility, and with time, scale them. I'll quickly introduce the first 3 practical options and then invite Inle to talk about the fourth and fifth and sixth, so that orients you into what the process has been thus far and what we're looking to achieve from today's session. The first practical option is capturing locally led adaptation. As many of you would know, understanding what local communities need and how to get finance to them has been a crux of the issue in scaling adaptation. Really, one of the biggest challenges in the adaptation finance landscape known today. And this practical option is driven by the need to shift the perception of adaptation finance as a collateral or a distraction from other pressing needs to something that is capable of driving system-level change and system-level impact. It seeks to democratize decision-making on finance allocation and enable local-level bodies to make decisions on what their needs are and how to allocate finance to addressing them. This practical option will deal with both public and private finance and both domestic and international sources of finance as well. I understand that means that it's a very large scope, but we want to ensure that these practical options are flexible for the countries and the regions in which they are implemented. So having that kind of large scope will help us whittle down the options to what works best depending on where it is being applied. And lastly, it is focused on capacity building at the local level so that we can ensure upstream financial viability of adaptation interventions at the local level. The second practical option is applying non-market approaches under Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement. This borrows from the original Clean Development Mechanism to design a similar non-market structure for adaptation and resilience projects, whereby something known as the certified adaptation benefits can be used to channel funds from large emitters, both countries and corporates, to locally relevant resilience projects in low-income and developing countries. The benefits can be ex ante, where you can leverage capital markets to move finance from towards future adaptation outcomes, or it can be ex post, where adaptation benefits mechanism is applied after the interventions or the adaptation interventions and projects are already underway. In other words, it can be retrofitted into existing funding models. This practical option may or may not be complemented by other fiscal instruments such as global levies and taxes, on which there is now obviously a great amount of conversation in international negotiations. The third practical option is building an open and verifiable data architecture to enable community level adaptation. And the goal of this practical option is to establish a standardized, interoperable data architecture that harmonizes how adaptation and resilience investments are measured, how they can be compared to one another across regions, across times, so that it's easy to understand their impacts. And this enables better decision making and alignment with finance and policy objectives. This top-down approach will be complemented with a bottom-up, community-led data verification process that ensures that adaptation really reflects the needs of people at the local level, and it strengthens local ownership and builds accountability. It will use emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence to overcome linguistic barriers and enhance accessibility, so that collection, validation, and sharing of both quantitative and qualitative data can enable real-time feedback loops and enhance the way that decisions are made in a way that responds best to local needs. With that, then, do you want to help us introduce? Thank you.
Thank you, Arushi. So I'll present the last three practical options. So the first one is on aggregating small-scale projects. The next one is fostering transparency and accountability. And the last one is on rewarding resilience investments. So for practical option number 4, it's establishing a project pipeline and aggregating small-scale projects. I think as most practitioners and maybe the people in the room know, many adaptation projects are too small, especially at the local and community level, and it's very difficult to attract institutional funding. So, and not only that, when you have so many small projects, the transaction costs, whether it's a small project or large project, there's a lot of paperwork, processing that needs to be done. So the transaction costs are really high in terms of how much funding you can get, and readiness is limited, and it constrains the access to finance. So this practical option explores the value of a collaborative platform that aggregates projects and hosts a project pipeline. So it can centralize information on the adaptation projects, map investment opportunities, and align projects with donors and investors. Some of the key features for this practical option is the co-designing of projects with communities, standardized processes and timelines, capacity building support, and multilingual and accessible tools. I think those of you who work with other development projects at small scale would recognize these approaches from other funding sources as well. Then the platform enables aggregation of small scale projects and the bundling of projects with similar objectives and structures into investable portfolios, the alignment with national priorities such as the NDCs and the NAPs, and attraction of institutional assessment. And I don't know how many of you have been involved in the CDM, but many small scale CDM projects used to face the same problems as well. So this could be a really practical approach to this problem. Then the fifth one is fostering transparency and accountability. So the problem here is there's usually a lack of clarity on where the adaptation finance comes from and where it is going. So there is a need to track the flow of finance from source to recipients. And this option looks at a self-enforcing and voluntary network of networks that includes regional institutions, civil society, academic institutions, indigenous peoples, and local communities, so among others, who could monitor the flows and enable oversight while keeping the community needs at the center and building trust, accountability, and equity. So the key elements of this practical option, number 5, is that this watchtower include standardized metrics, disclosure of requirements, and regulatory safeguards. So this is about fostering transparency and accountability. Then the last practical option that is being looked at is rewarding resilience investments in credit ratings. So now I guess we're moving from really small scale up to a macro country level and maybe global level systems here. So the credit ratings of countries is usually assesses only the fiscal performances of the countries, the economies, and then it should move from not only looking at that, but also looking at the physical risks which pose long-term threats to the community. So we know that in the long run, adaptation is a big threat to economies, communities, and the countries as well. So if we recognize investments in adaptation within this credit rating, it can help create a fairer system and allow the capital to remain, especially in vulnerable regions, because a lot of countries, if you have rated that they're vulnerable, it gives a negative rating. So if you can demonstrate that there is investments in resilience and adaptation projects, that should improve the rating standings. So the expected outcomes from this option includes lower cost of capital, increased investment in vulnerable areas, and better alignment with finance, better alignment of finance with resilience. So the finance can be directed to adaptation investments through resilience credits that will monetize adaptation outcomes, use robust measurement systems, enable blended finance, and lastly, enable and align financial systems with climate resilience goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanay. All right, you've heard a lot from us, and since this is a co-creative process, I want to invite any questions or comments you have thus far on what we've talked about, whether it's the process on building these co-creative practical options, or what the stated objectives of this session are, or even comments on the practical options themselves. You'll find mics right behind you. We have about 10 minutes to hear from you. Any thoughts are welcome. Okay, it looks like we did a great job of clearing the doubts that you had in for everyone who indicated that they don't understand the process really well. Great. So we can move to the breakout sessions then. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Thanks. And to help you choose. These are the 6 practical options. The 5th one will be online, so fostering transparency and accountability will be an online-only breakout group. But the first 4 and the 6th will be in this room. I encourage you to choose the ones that you feel best fitted you would like to contribute to. The moderators' names are on the right. If the moderators could just identify themselves, please. You can put up your hand. And thank you. And Carlos at the back. And for whoever wants to work with whichever practical option, please could you move to the tables that have them. So for capturing locally led adaptation, you'll go to group 1 where Kancham is. That's the table right there. There is a subgroup for Russian speakers headed by Marina. If anybody who is only comfortable speaking Russian would like to contribute to capturing locally led adaptation, I encourage you to move to that table. And then we have Carlos moderating the breakout session on applying non-market approaches. He's right there. So please feel free to move to whichever group you're comfortable with. The third one is Seren's group, and she's there, and she's moving to the table. So feel free to move around, please. This is as informal as you would like to make it. And whichever topic or practical option you're most comfortable with, please feel free to move to that table. Thank you. We're still looking for people to move to group 6 on rewarding resilience investments. Please find Tenle at the right there. As you settle into your groups, I'll quickly go over the guiding questions that will take you through this breakout group. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. On your table, you will see the draft pathways, and that'll help you orient yourselves to what we have done so far on each of these practical options. We would request you to review these pathways and validate them, refine them where necessary. You have complete ownership of these draft pathways, so if at any point you think something does not correspond to what your vision for that pathway is, please feel free to cut it out, replace it with something, add or subtract as you see fit. The second question is to help you perhaps consider what are the enabling conditions that would ensure success of this particular practical option. Then what are the key barriers, risks, and challenges to implementing them? And what, if any, are the important gaps that need to be addressed? And finally, are these practical options and the pathways to implement them flexible enough that they can be adapted to the local realities and needs wherever they are implemented? One quick request to the moderators, please appoint a rapporteur for your group, someone who can come back and tell us in the plenary, that is to follow these two breakout groups, what were the key takeaways from your discussion. We'd love to hear, and we'd also really like to take note of this rich discussion so that we can refer back to it at another point. So if you would like emailed copies of this so that you can work directly into the document, please let me know and I will join you on the floor just now. Since we are a little over time, we have about an hour to finish this discussion so that we can then give you some time for tea and coffee as well. Thank you.
Is there? I don't see any participants there. Just so I was just checking. I saw just our team there, but I can check again. If there is anyone online. Maybe we message Roger first.
I just want to announce for the virtual group. I'm not sure, Andre, Arushi, you can hear me well. We are trying to disconnect the virtual group from the plenary, and we will begin once Andre Arushi confirms that we're good to go. Please stay with us. Okay, looks like we are ready to go. Dalia, are you in the meeting? Just confirming.
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good tea break. We'll move now to the second breakout group discussion, which follows the same format. We'll be discussing a different set of questions this time. If I can move to the next slide, please. Oh, right. And this would be a slightly shorter breakout group with a very focused discussion on identifying implementation partners. If there are folks in this room who would like to take ownership of one or maybe more of the pathways that you have discussed today and test them in your specific geographies to test their viability and their feasibility, it would be great to hear from you and to see what your ideas for implementation would look like. I will recommend or suggest that you are at liberty to move between breakout groups at this point. So if there is another pathway or practical option that you're curious about, please identify that moderator or that group, and you may join that discussion, even if that's for a briefer period of time in this breakout group. So with that, I'll leave it to you. You have about 45 minutes, 45 to 50 minutes for this discussion. And just like the last time, I'll be on the floor if you have any questions or need any clarifications. And the same goes for the virtual group as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise them right now or in the chat, however you see fit. And again, in the room, if you have any questions, please do ask them. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Since everyone's been very efficient, we'll cut this breakout little short and wrap up in another 10 minutes, so by 5:30 instead of 5:50. Thank you, everybody. If I can request you to maybe take a seat, and then we can start with the plenary and synthesis stage. Since we've not heard at all from the virtual group, may I, Roji, please request your team, your group to go first?
Thank you so much, Enusa. We have Ava from FAO. She has kindly volunteered to report back on our discussion. Over to Ava.
Thank you, Regina. So I will pass quickly on our guiding questions. So first, we discussed about the pathway around fostering transparency and accountability and how to strengthen it. So what came up mostly was to strengthen the framing about the end goal. So we discussed about operationalizing transparency and accountability for creating new forms of collaboration between sources of funds and also for creating new value addition. So this was one of the overarching recommendation for strengthening the pathway. We discussed also about strengthening alignment with global frameworks, such as the work under the GGA and operationalizing the indicators, as well as other frameworks such as NDC, NAPS, and national reporting processes. Especially one recommendation was around the target 10C, which is touching upon climate finance, and it was recommended to also ensure close alignment with the work under this target. Another point was about the need for stakeholders to understand that transparency is not just compliance, but it's also an opportunity for them. So an entry point identified was to socialize stakeholders into accountability, engagement, for them to understand really that it's an opportunity for all. Yes. And another point, and which was also a major challenge that was identified, was about the definition of adaptation finance. What does it mean? What different kinds of actors and sectors? So the need to unpack really clearly this definition was put forward as a recommendation to ensure that progress in collective transparency and accountability is possible. And so we discussed key actions and also regions where this pathway could be piloted. We had a really interesting perspective from SIDS, especially from Mauritius, who is really has in the context of the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, which is hosted in the country, has some enablers such as private sector actors with experience with adaptation finance and ready to work with the public sector. So it was also proposed maybe to work with them to identify key enablers to make adaptation finance concrete, especially between private sector and public sector, and also build maybe an engagement plan that we could learn from. Another point also proposed action was about under the Nairobi Work Program to establish a working group working on the definition of adaptation finance. And so that could be enriched from perspective of different sectoral actors and type of organization. We also noted as an action to continue to engage within the framework of the global goal on adaptation indicators work. So many of the stakeholders were interested to continue the discussion within this framework. So yeah, we have like contributors from different type of organization, Australia, the Bingo Group, Comar Group as well. Yongo was there. So mostly this is kind of the key recommendation and action we wanted to share. So I have also colleagues within our working group who would like to complement, add to it. Please feel free to take the floor. And yeah, this is it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Ava. If there's nothing that anybody online would like to add, then I can move to people in the room. Any last thoughts, Regina, that you wanted to add perhaps?
No, all good. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Ava, for a very good overview of the discussions you've had over the last couple of hours. I'll move to the people in the room. Any group can go first. There is no hierarchy. If nobody volunteers, I will choose. Okay, great. Group 4. The mic is right behind you. If you prefer to take that, alternatively, you can come and speak here as well.
Thank you very much. I'm representing a group that constitutes Laos, Vietnam, and Malawi. So I'll proceed to look at the questions, the initial ones, that said, how can we strengthen the platform that is being established? One, we considered the key milestones that they should be broken. It's up to 2040, but I think we should have milestones for 5 years, for example. From now, 5 years, another 5 years, instead of having it as a complete time frame. Then also in terms of actors, we said we also need to engage the private sector, the academia, those UN agencies in the specific countries, the CSOs, they also focus on the beneficiaries like the youth, women, and the vulnerable groups. And that will be important so that we have a lasting or sustainable initiative in terms of understanding the beneficiaries. In terms of enabling conditions, we added the ones that are there, okay, but we also included aspects of initial resources. This will support in terms of assessments, which should happen before the platform is established, so that we know the critical areas, the challenges that the communities are facing, for example, issues of floods, because we do believe that this can work if we prioritize the platform in those particular areas that are already receiving or getting the negative impacts from climate change. And also, there should be mechanisms for sharing best practices and knowledge that is being generated, particularly in the pilots of that platform, so that we have the pilots, then we upscale that pilot upon implementation of that. Then in terms of the region, we say this should be based on issues that are coming out from the specific countries. For example, regions where communities are mostly affected, either ecosystems are degraded, so we can target that because already we have a list of issues that are coming. And also, I think I should have mentioned that in terms of prioritization, we should base on the existing strategies at that particular local level. In the example of Malawi, we have district councils or local councils, and within that they have district development plans. So, and also environmental action plans. We should already target those particular areas. And in terms of engagement plan, as I mentioned, I think there's need to start with assessment to understand who should be involved, what will be their specific roles, and also coming up with a clear outreach program so that we already get a buy-in from the various stakeholders that are going to participate on the same. In the engagement plan also, we need to actually outline specific roles and timelines for for the particular milestones in the, yeah. And maybe on the capacity building, I think we noted a few things that we need to have to come. One is to develop the guidelines or guidance on the platform, how to operate, and who should be the lead within that. Because if we don't define leadership in the process, I think it will be very difficult also to attain the objective of this particular platform. We also need to build capacity for those participating in terms of getting linkage to financing. Because if we don't do that, we find that maybe we can raise unnecessary hopes, but we already should have the programs aligned to maybe pointers to say you can access this funding instead of communities hoping that the platform, they will get money from there. But I think at least there's need to link to financing arrangements under the convention and others, or bilaterals and so on. Again, I think in terms of capacity and awareness, they need to have a comprehensive consultation, leaving no one behind, to ensure that there is ownership, and also involvement from the local experts in the particular pilot areas or countries. Finally, if not, yeah, in terms of organizations that have expressed that we think could be involved in this could be local, the country UN agencies like UNDP, like in Malawi, for example, we have UNDP, FAO, already I think there's somewhere entry points in terms of starting this particular intervention, and also engaging directly the government of Malawi, either through Ministry of Finance or Minister responsible for environment. And other institutions, we think these bilateral countries that have presence in those, like in our case, we have embassies, we have development agencies within each country. For example, the Norwegians, they have theirs. We used to have USAID. These were already potentially, and other agencies like International Fund for Agricultural Development, because they already have projects existing there. So we can ride on those. Central banks and also local banks. Maybe this is what this group discussed. I hope we have presented what we agreed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this very comprehensive overview again. Lots of points that I think are very similar to discussions that other groups had as well. So let's move along. We'll hear from Group 1, which in Russian discussed locally led adaptation, which was practical option 1. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We represent indigenous peoples and local communities. So, within the work plan, we propose to focus on establishing fair, accessible, and long-term financial mechanisms that ensure direct access for indigenous peoples and local communities to climate finance. Particular attention should be given to ecosystem restoration initiatives, as well as to participation in the carbon markets under fair and transparent conditions. It is important to recognize that many community-led environmental projects have long payback periods, like 10, 17 years, and are often not considered profitable by traditional financial institutions. At the same time, they generate significant non-material value by preserving biodiversity, cultural heritage, and traditional knowledge, which are not adequately reflected in existing economic models. In this context, we propose The establishment of a dedicated fund to support indigenous-led initiatives with simplified access to financing and flexible evaluation criteria, the development of public-private partnerships mechanism to share risks and incentivize investment in long-term environmental projects, the reform and integration of currently absent or fragmented carbon markets into a unified global system and registries, including the creation of incentives for community participation and ensuring their integration into international mechanisms, while addressing existing barriers and limited access. Also, the introduction of impact-based finance approaches that go beyond short-term financial returns and account for ecosystem and social benefits. Strengthening the role of public support mechanisms, including subsidies, guarantees, and co-financing for initiatives focused on climate adaptation and ecosystem restoration. These measures will help bridge the gap between global financial instruments and local needs, ensuring more adaptive and flexible approaches. This approach can be most effectively piloted in Russia, so we have 2 representatives from Russia, indigenous peoples, and given its wide diversity of climatic zones, natural conditions, and indigenous peoples and local communities living across different regions. The process would begin with engaging local populations through information and project-based activities, including research, consultations, discussions with key stakeholders, and data analysis. Key actors involved in implementation could include local communities, of course, financial institutions, industrial organizations, and the government. These stakeholders would work in partnership. Executive authorities would provide coordination. Local communities would act as beneficiaries. Industry would serve as a partner, and financial institutions would act as sources of funding. And the last but not least, short-term success would include the establishment of partnership agreements, securing initial funding tranches, and creating mutually beneficial conditions for all parties involved. And long-term success would involve replication, scaling up the approach, and ensuring a stable and sustainable financial flow. So these are our inputs. We send it to the email, and thank you.
Thank you so much for your participation. It's definitely made our discussions richer to have indigenous peoples, communities also represented in this process. We have 4 remaining groups. Anyone wants to volunteer? Carlos, this table will go. Yeah, great.
Thank you so much. This is group 2, so I will be reporting on the outcomes of the chapter on applying non-market approaches under Article 6.8 of Paris Agreement with a view to develop an adaptation benefit mechanism. So the table was enabling very rich discussions, mainly from our delegates here from Togo, Mr. Naku Fogan Pascal, and also the gentleman from the same minister. I would like to maybe refer to the first round of questions. The question that triggers the initial discussion was what countries or regions could be effective the pilots. So this is the second round that we have on the discussions, but I think it's very important to refer to these examples to set the scene of what were the other guiding questions. In terms of the impacts, so they were focusing mainly on the transboundary regions in West Africa, particularly making reference to Senegal, Benin, Togo, Ghana, Mauritania, and the in the West Africa region, the Pacific coast, looking into one of the high or priority impacts that is connected to vulnerable coastal erosion. So in their view, the pilot should be focusing on vulnerable communities, gender, female actors that are usually impacted by coastal erosion, and the ecosystems that should be targeted for the piloting could include, of course, areas connected to mangroves, to food production systems, and other ecosystem-based approaches that help to enhance the livelihood of the vulnerable communities. The second question is connected to the need of what are the priority needs to be implemented in the next 2 years or within the next 2 years. So the first point is to identify national and local adaptation needs, define priority impacts, looking into these coastal erosion systems, what are the aspects that negatively impact the livelihoods and are responsible for the displacement, mobility, and mortality aspects when looking at the big picture of coastal erosion. Then, important to coordinate closely with local authorities and governments. They need to be part of the solution and help the national governments to co-design also the plans to act in terms of Article 6.8. It's a cooperative approach that requires, of course, participation not only of the authorities, but also other key actors in the system, including the supporting infrastructure, financiers, capacity builders, the academia, NGOs, and other key stakeholders relevant to collect the views also from the local communities, but indigenous peoples, and include them in the design of the solutions at an early stage. I covered already the needs to participate in implementation, but maybe one of the interesting points is the need to involve legal advisors that understand the financial systems at a very early stage of design. They can significantly help to structure the mechanism and also being able to effectively access to the financial systems in a more efficient, informed, and prompt way. So the key message here is to have access to the legal financial advisors at a very early stage. What does success look like for the table? They graphically indicated the dream picture as an outcome of this exercise is to have more than 4 heads of state shaking their hands on common goals that makes, of course, the actions on adaptation and resilience effective. Currently, they feel that there is an issue, despite that they work in the same region, that there is no common understanding on the opportunities of the non-carbon approaches, and there is also not a good understanding on what are the priorities in terms of gap and needs, and so that is a problem because this is not enable collective cooperative actions that is needed in the context of Article 6.8. And when discussing on what could be the root cause of that situation, they say it's probably because of selfish individual interest and also to some extent, in some cases, they might be impacted by risk or barriers in terms of corruption, for example, but not only applicable to Africa, of course, but to other regions in the world that sometimes jeopardize collaboration. I will go very quickly to the other round of questions. So how can the pathways be strengthened. So they should be country-driven and grounded in national realities. In many occasions, the pathways are not looking necessarily to the ultimate goal, that is addressing the adaptation benefits. And it's important to understand and clarify the levels of governance that is needed, including who coordinates, who validates the benefits, and who reports and is accountable for the co-designing of these mechanisms, and align them with the NAPs and NDCs. Steps and milestones realistic or properly sequenced? That's the question. And in their view, they are realistic, but necessarily, it's absolutely necessary to implement quick steps to allow for the governance and institutional arrangements very early so that you can see the benefits beyond 2030. Enabling conditions, it's very important to have national ownership and leadership, coordinate structures across ministries and the multi-levels of governance, produce also the institutional arrangements to access to data, capacity building, technology information that is compatible with the local context and national circumstances, and connect that narrative also with the financial system. When discussing about the risk and barriers for implementation, they clearly identify that there might be lack of transparency, particularly some potential issues of corruption when it comes to non-market approaches that need to be addressed at the regional or country level. That goes, of course, is applicable to all circumstances, even beyond Africa. That's what they highlighted. But maybe one of the interesting common approaches is to use different examples. They shared the example of one case in Central America, Costa Rica, where they have implemented fiducial arrangements that were very integral, collecting views from all key actors in society. So I tried to summarize, but I will pass the floor to the members of the table if I miss any of the key points. I don't think this is the case, but thank you so much, and sorry for extending the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. This was a very technical subject, and I think your group did a great job of breaking it down, so appreciate it. I think we're moving to Serin's group. Floor is yours.
Thank you. So our group discussed on the open and verifiable data architecture to enable community-level adaptation. Sorry, I have to stand up. We have our all written here. So we actually identify quite a lot of risk before we talk about the implementation. Some of them are like, we think that there are like a lot of barrier between the bottom-up and also the top-down data sets, and how to link it will become a very important way that we talk about the implementation. So the clarification in objective, is it like being operational, or is it like a reference grid for, achieving the sustainability? That will be our main goal of the implementation, and how it fit into the whole, government system. That will be a very crucial thing. So we think that it has to drive for a very strong political will, and also the capacity to build into the policy that is existing. And also we also have to solve the problem about the political barrier, because it requires a lot of trust to build a data validation, whether the data from the government and also the bottom-up data, are they matching each other, or is it actually because of their government priorities that has creating a lot of mismatches? So when we talk about the implementation, there are the points that we haven't repeated from previous groups, because the sharing of other groups are actually quite similar to what we discussed. So those are the points that we would like to highlight, that are the differences that we saw. And then for the second discussion part, we also talk about whether we would like to pick a location, but we would rather like to like stage it as a regional balance rather than picking a specific area, because our topic is more like the data set and data architecture. So we think that it's like more applicable to different places. So we didn't really pick on one place to do it. We think that to develop the strategy to engage with the government and the communities will be really crucial for the architecture to continue. And also how we build a platform to collect different sets of data will be very important, because we have discussed that there are like different data sets within different kind of stakeholders holding their own sets of data that are not aligning with each other, or we find it very difficult and challenging to map exactly who are actually having replicable data sets. And then so what we need to do is that we need to identify a sustainable financial resources, and also map the existing organizations who are already working on it, so that we know that what kind of data resources are already there. And also we need to identify communities that want to like take place in the pilot program. And then for the stakeholders, like the actors who are going to be in the scene, it requires a lot of people like NGOs, academia, statistic institutions, funders who are, like providing the resources for us to continue the thing. And also like we need someone to co-lead with us. So it includes indigenous people, it includes like the community leaders, so that we get like the bottom-up set of data. And then how do we measure if it's a success or not? So for short term, we think that a successful pilot meaning that we create a very practical methodologies, which can be, like seen as an active participation of the communities or of the stakeholders that are involved, and also have we built a capacity for the one who are involved to understand the content in a, like synchronized way, instead of having different languages. And also we need to have a very solid and also understandable monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems. So for the long term, we think that sustainability is the, the vital factor of everything. So what do we mean by sustainable? It means that the government are buying in the thing that we are like talking about, and also is there like a possibility of replication in different areas, different regions, and also is it like linked possibly with the green finance taxonomy, which creates a stable funding for things to continue. And then the final one is that do we have a linkage with other practical options, which means that we are actually bridging like all this kind of like cross sections solutions that we want to map together, instead of like being very silo. So that's how we measure in like a long-term like success that we have discussed about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the structured way in which you presented the key arguments or the key discussions from your group. We'll move to, I think Tinley has the mic. He's hidden behind the, oh, you have the mic, sorry. I couldn't really see. You're up.
Yeah, so good evening, everybody. Our topic was on capturing locally led adaptation. So there is a roadmap is already mapped for the implementation. So there is one key milestone by time frame 2040, that a share of international adaptation finance flows 40 to 50% is directed towards local level actors. So what we have discussed in our group, that it should be at least 50%, because till 2040 the earth will be reaching at its tipping point and the damage will be irreversible. So the majority part of the, at least 50% of the part should be directed towards the local level actors. And by the key actors we mean government, communities, and the NGOs, DFIs, private sector, financial entities. Also, youth should also be included, academic sectors and research organizations in the countries. Women, local communities, and indigenous communities should also be included. Then when we talk about the enabling condition, So there's some more points which we want to add. So a capacity building among local communities and indigenous community should be there. Then we discussed about how there should be a mandating compliance for manufacturing sectors. So we have seen in manufacturing sectors that they are only bothered about sustainability when they are mandated. Particularly if I see in developing countries, they are more focused on profits rather than sustainability, and they see climate change as the voluntary part. So in particularly in India, there is BRSR, which has been uh, um, recognized by SEBI. So listed companies have mandatory compliance to release their sustainability report. So this mandating compliance should be there not only for listed companies but also for MSMEs, small scale industries, and also for the large scale industries. Second is growing geopolitical tension, so peace and security among the countries. Then next is what are the challenges that can be faced. So first is breach tipping point. So by 2040, it won't be for adaptation, it will be for loss and damage. If we talk about the financial part, then there are some inconsistencies in the community engagement. So in many places, it has seen that after completing one project, there is the inconsistencies has been observed. Then high demand of finance by the parties, peace and challenge, and fragmentation of data, and not able to maintain the accountability of the data. So these are the few key challenges which has been identified. Next is the engagement plan. So what can be the engagement plan? So as per our discussion, there should be an adaptation platforms where communities can directly apply on the platform, and the platform can find the best match based on the eligibility and requirement for the funding. So there can be an AI driven system or IT related system. Then the communities that are most affected, they can say how and where the funds can be used. Then regarding other organizations, so there can be a philanthropic organizations, and their private sectors can also contribute. Like in many companies, there has been seen that there are some CSR activities that has been mandated. Specifically, if I talk about India, that if a company is listed, they have to mandatorily show their CSR activities. So rather than only focusing on other CSR activities, their private companies can also contribute in the climate change. Then next is where could this pathway be piloted most effectively. So we have identified a few things like in decentralized governance, then federal structures, local adaptation plan of action, community adaptation plan, and policy framework it can be adopted. Strong community framework can be adopted. Then what could actions look like to initiate implementation within the next 12 to 24 months? So we have prepared a map for it. So first of all, a project will be developed, then a stakeholder consultation will be done, then there will be a risk assessment where the adaptation priorities will also be identified, then the funding will be applied, sharing and networking will be done, and finally once the funding is approved, implementation can be done. um, Next is what would success look like in short term and long term. So in short term, success could look like team engagement, a good team engagement. Then for long term, we have identified a few points like increased resilience, then reduced vulnerability, access to finance, maintaining the outcomes, and increased local jobs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, appreciate how you kept your points very structured. I'll give this to Tinley now, who lost most of his group, but I think there was still a very valuable discussion. So I'm glad that we can benefit from that expertise.
Thank you. I think I'm the last group, right?
Yes.
It wasn't a big group to begin with. We had 4 people, including me. And we're not sure if we had the full enough informed participants to actually be part of it. But fortunately, we had somebody who was in the field among us. So we didn't get to group the second set of the questions, the breakout 2, but we spent some time on group breakout 1. And we looked at the questions holistically and went through the timeline and the roadmap here. So going back, I think let's get off the long term quickly. The horizon of 2040, I think we had quite a rich discussion, and we said maybe 2040 is actually a bit too far off to get this in place. By then there may be a major disaster, and then the whole point of this would be defeated by then, especially if you want vulnerable countries. And I think this originated with the SIDS proposal with PM Mia Motley on the small island cases. So in terms of this may be too far off. So we need to bring that timeline forward, is the thing we had, the first major one. And then in terms of the key, I think in terms of really making this happen, is we need the right participants in this, the stakeholders involved, and that's the private sector and the financial institutions. And the key message was they need to be aware about the risks, resilience of countries. Most of the adaptation plans, projects are done in the countries, but the financial institutions and the actors are not aware about it. So they're not really able to be incorporated into their decision making and how they do the ratings. So a lot of the ratings takes place in the absence of that information. We're guessing that at some point, maybe it will happen naturally. They are already cognizant of the increasing disasters and the recurrence of the accelerated climate change. But the objective should be to accelerate this uptake of the resilience rewarding. So in terms of actors involved, it's not just the private sector. Then we had identified in the short term that row, it says multilateral institutions, but we said it may need to be clearer, that it needs to be multilateral development banks and the institutions that are involved in this, so make it a little clearer. So one of the recommendations of the language needs to be a little clearer. The other ones are like the government. When it says government, it needs to be clear. So it's not just limited to finance. Usually when you say adaptation, it's the line ministries are involved. And if it's in a finance discussion, only the finance ministries come. So to be careful and ensure that both finance and non-finance line ministries are spelled out clearly so that they are there in the same room to discuss this, specifically because of the question of finance ministries don't know what the others are doing, the others don't know what the finance ministry is doing, so we need to make sure that they're in the same room together. That's a key message. Then in terms of the enabling environment, we said it's a largely political process, so we have to recognize that, and it's not just at the country national level, it's a global process, so we need to recognize and identify the stakeholders for that, and the momentum needs to be maintained. We've had this movement in the last few years, but it needs to be maintained. And a key thing is, again, the linkages. This is talking about measuring metrics, resilience, so whatever the other practical options in terms of benefits, measurements taking place, there needs to be some linkages brought in. And early on, there's a need for engaging more researchers, academics, making the case, studying what could be the methodologies, how to take this forward. So a lot of that needs to take place, and it needs to be, the information needs to be socialized and made aware to all stakeholders, is one of the key ones. And then in the short term, there was a launch, a resilience credit market. So it says that, but we didn't see a linkages in terms of the other columns, what was happening. So maybe a pilot needs to be there, or more studies that leads towards this before that can happen, is one of the key recommendations. And I think I have covered most of the key discussions that we had. So that's largely it. So key is to accelerate this process, and we need the private sector, government, line ministries, everybody engaged in the same room together.
Thank you, Thinley. Thank you again to everybody for the very rich discussions and for sharing it here in the plenary. There were several cross-cutting themes across all your discussions that I have noted, and I had the benefit, of course, from listening to some of these discussions as you were having them. And I want to highlight them here because I think it gets very much to the heart of why this process was started, in that it has to be consultative, it has to be co-creative. The first cross-cutting theme was that, as I said, this is a consultative process. Not only does it involve diverse actors, but it has to necessarily be community-led and community-enabled. It has to answer to priorities that are identified by the actors that are engaged in it, and it has to necessarily be needs-based, both at the local and at the national level. And also it has to be country-driven and based in countries. It cannot be a top-down effort. As we've seen, that has been the trend over the last several years that we've addressed these problems, and we're still discussing it, so we need to maybe shift the lens through which we look at this challenge. And also because this enables us to share some of the financial risks associated with addressing adaptation challenges. The second is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can allow these processes to reflect existing national frameworks, whether that's the NAPs, the NDCs, local laws. The third, and I think this became very clear through many of your discussions, we need to answer the question, who are we solving for? The beneficiaries need to be put up front, and we need to work backwards from what works for them rather than what works for us being imposed on them. The fourth, heard from everybody on capacity building, that there needs to be a common understanding and a shared language around a lot of these issues so that it's easier to co-learn, it's easier to share best practices, and eventually map communities and work with those communities across geographies as well. And finally, metrics for what success could look like in the long term were rather shared, that it has to be scalable, solutions have to be replicable, and linked with existing financial systems so that they can become self-sustaining and self-supporting as well. There was also a point made by several people on decentralized ownership and autonomy in how these financial decisions are made. And I think, again, that speaks very much to why some of these practical options were developed. And I'll end with the one that is perhaps my favorite, which is that financial solutions or solutions to scale adaptation finance have to break silos. They have to go beyond one ministry dealing with things versus how many ever it actually takes, one industry dealing with it versus the number that it would take to bring a systems level change. So thank you again for your very valuable inputs. I'll move now to the closing, and I would like to invite Mr. Carlos Carvia, who is the team lead for Adaptation Committee Unit at the UNFCCC Secretariat, to provide us with closing remarks. Thanks, Carlos.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me well. But I have the privilege to close this session and maybe with a few thoughts. So first, I would like to really thank all the participants, speakers, facilitators, reporters, and partners for their valuable contribution. Of course, there was many of the preparations and planning at the back. Particularly, would like to name the moderators of the tables who were actively engaging, especially Tinley, Serim, Wanaporn. Big thanks to Aishiri as well for putting together the materials and the guidance, and of course to the lead of this group, to Roger and the team in Bonn that is behind also ensuring the success of this event. Very important also to stress the participation of other members in the tables, the Adaptation Committee members, the LEG members that been also contributing and supporting the process, making this Nairobi Work Program a platform very effective. I can't list them all, but this is really a big thanks as well for to the team, to Miwa and the team. I'd like to maybe say a few things about why we are here. Remember that the Nairobi Work Program has a mandate and that this event has a particular goal. So I will be very quick with these reflections, but today's event is part of a broader co-creative process that has been initiated with the aim of supporting real-world uptake and implementation. So this is a really important platform for the success of the implementation of the climate agenda and the efforts that this Climate Week is displaying. Today also was very useful in realizing the role of the Nairobi World Program. You see that we see the benefit of this Knowledge to Action Hub for adaptation and resilience, and is helping us to advance knowledge-based, inclusive, and action-oriented work on adaptation by the possibility to bring together all these diverse knowledge holders and identify practical options that support implementation. So it's a privilege to have also communities, local communities and indigenous people contributing in these platforms. We have achieved two main objectives. The first one is to redefine and contextualize the practical options that emerge from this very unique and first of its kind co-created process, identify partnerships and actions which are relevant across the support and uptake of knowledge, not only at the regional levels or global levels, but very importantly at the country levels, and they are country-driven in nature when it comes to its implementation. I won't try to attempt to list the 7 points that Arushi mentioned before that came out from the tables. We saw the common denominators identify from consultative process to what is needed, but very important, maybe the last point on why it is needed to break silos and achieve coherence and defragment efforts. So this platform has been extremely successful in doing that. Let me move to the next steps. I think this is very important to give continuity to these co-creation efforts. So we will share these refined practical options with parties and relevant actors. So we have around the corner the June sessions and COP, and of course there will be a momentum for parties to learn as well on the outcomes of these tables and uptake of knowledge, and also the elements that are important for country-driven implementation mobilized through the partners that are here in the room. This means, of course, ensuring that the knowledge is generated through these processes, but is translated into effective, customized options and actions by countries and regions through the partners. So we hope that these outcomes of the event provide the partners and all the actors that I mentioned before with more contextualized practical options, and we will be as a team in the Secretariat through the leadership of the Nairobi World Program colleagues ready to give you more information and to serve you if you need platforms along the objective of the event today. Many thanks, and so have a safe travels back home. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for your active participation. If there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and we look forward to your continued engagement with the Nairobi Work Program. Thank you.